It's taken me 25 years to come to the conclusions that I have come to. And I want to tell you that one of the biggest things I discovered in my work was the existence of a supranational committee composed of 300 men called the Committee of 300, also known in intelligence circles as the Olympians.
300 people you've never heard of. They don't hold office, they don't give speeches, they don't campaign, they don't need your vote. And he's not talking about the secret societies you've heard 100 times. This is what the headlines never touch.
This is the committee that runs the world. Now, in my book, The Committee of 300, I name every one of them. This is not a book that talks about they. It gives you specifics.
Now, this is one of those videos that rarely stays visible for long. But what you're about to watch will explain a lot of the strange things happening in the world right now. So, let's get right into it.
Who and what is the Committee of 300? Well, I've dealt with that. I've told you this is a supranational body that knows no boundaries, respects the laws of no countries. The first time that they were publicly announced was by a German socialist by the name of Walter Rathenau. Now, I'll give you some background of Walter Rathenau. He was the financial advisor to the Kaiser of Germany, and he was also the financial advisor to the Rothschilds, the French family Rothschild. So he must have known what he's talking about. He made an astonishing statement in 1934. He said, there is a committee of 300 men that rule the world. They are known only to each other, and nothing happens without their consent.
This isn't about symbols, or handshakes, or a club everyone already suspects. This is the top of the chain. At least that's his claim. The structure nobody sees. And as this man will explain, every organization has its place. They all fit into a hierarchy. But at the very top, 300 people. Pay attention to this part.
I came across this quite by accident when I was serving in Africa, in Angola, and I was given a series of documents which were only supposed to be handed in to top-level people. They were what we call above the top level of classification of intelligence documents. And there I discovered that whilst I thought I was in Africa fighting against the invasion of the communists, I was in fact fighting to introduce socialist regimes in the black African countries, and that I was actually working for a committee called the Committee of 300, also known in intelligence circles as the Olympians.
This isn't someone guessing from the sidelines. He's describing a moment where the story didn't match the mission. He thought he was fighting one enemy. Then he claims he realized he was building something else entirely. And that raised a different kind of question. Not who's in charge, but how high the chain really goes. His name is Dr. John Coleman, and he frames this as a 25-year-old investigation shaped by intelligence-level access. Let's keep going.
In 1986, I wrote a work called Mind Control, Metaphysics, Extremely Low Frequency Radiation and Weather Modifications. And in that work, July the 8th, 1986, I said that the top-level intelligence organization in the United States was the National Reconnaissance Office, far bigger than the CIA and any of the other intelligence agencies. And by the way, we have about 10 different ones in the United States. I even had the audacity to give the address of this organization. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Sam Donaldson, the gentleman who wears that beautiful toupee so effectively, he came on with a program in prime time, and he said, this is one of the biggest scoops that ABC has ever had. And he told about the National Reconnaissance Organization. The exact same thing that I published 8 years earlier. I tell you this to set the stage so that you'll understand I do have some experience and that I know that of which I speak.
So here's what he's doing. He's not just making a claim. He's planting a marker in time, 1986. And he says he named the organization before the public was even supposed to know it existed. Because once you understand that layer exists, you stop thinking intelligence is just spies in meetings. It's reach, it's visibility, it's who gets to see the world first and who reacts second. And if a system like that sits above the usual agencies, then you have to ask a darker question. What sits above that? Watch this.
And I came across the families in Italy who were called the Fondi, meaning the people who had all the money. They were all members of the Committee of 300, the Lucatis, the Recanatis, the Volpi du Miseratis. These people are so wealthy that they would make David Rockefeller look like a piker. That is how rich they are. And this is the committee that runs the world. Now, in my book, The Committee of 300, I name every one of them. This is not a book that talks about they. It gives you specifics.
This is where his story shifts from theory to names. Not they, not someone. He's saying, I can point to families. And whether you believe his list or not, the idea underneath it is real. Power doesn't reset every 4 years. It accumulates. It inherits. It survives scandals, elections, and headlines. Because the kind of influence that lasts isn't built on popularity. It's built on ownership, on access, on networks that don't need to introduce themselves. But even wealth isn't the whole machine. Wealth needs a way to move the world without showing its hand. And this is where it gets uncomfortable.
When former head of state Mikhail Gorbachev visited the United States a few years ago, flanked by George Bush and Quayle, he opened his Gorbachev Foundation in the United States. And he left slip, he said, this is being done with approval of the Committee of 300. CNN cameras were on him. They immediately switched. Now, I wrote to CNN and I said, could I have a transcript of this program, which they said was available. I never got a reply. I followed it up with letter after letter, but nothing ever came of it. The point I'm trying to make, ladies and gentlemen, is that the federal government, the secret upper-level parallel government that runs the United States, does not want you to know that you have an upper-level parallel government that calls the shots, that dictates what is going to happen to your life and mine.
That line changes everything. Because now he's not describing a theory, he's describing a system that protects itself. Maybe there's an innocent explanation. Maybe not. But the point is this. If influence can decide what gets recorded, then it can also decide what gets remembered. And once power becomes something you can't even trace, the next question isn't who, it's where. Where does a structure like that live? Because it wouldn't operate as a rumor. It would operate through institutions. Pay attention to this part.
I revealed the existence of an organization called the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which is located at Chatham House in 10 St. James Square in London. I also revealed the existence of the Club of Rome, the Cini Foundation, the Mont Pelerin Society, the Order of St. John, which was known but not known. And I listed all of these secret societies that run the world as executive arms of the Committee of 300. So it controls the world through all of these. The Royal Institute for International Affairs is the executive arm of this committee, which gives instructions to the United States government to this very day. The chain of command is as follows. Every Secretary of State that has been appointed since 1919 is appointed by the Royal Institute for International Affairs. That may come as a shock for you. You think you vote and you put a conservative in the White House, and then he appoints supposedly or allegedly conservative people to carry out the policies that you wanted him to implement. Surprise, surprise. I ask you to find me a conservative Secretary of State since 1919. And if you search diligently and apply the correct rules, you will come up blank. Every one of the Secretaries of State was chosen in London by the Secretary of State, as was Wilson, the President Wilson, as was Roosevelt, as was James Earl Carter. He was specially chosen because he'd had 3 mental breakdowns, and they felt he would be a good guy to manipulate. Oh, I'm talking facts.
Different presidents, different parties, the same advisory structure. Because when policy is filtered before it even reaches an election, votes don't change direction, they change packaging. But institutional influence alone doesn't move societies. To shape real outcomes, it needs something stronger. Leverage, economic pressure, dependence that turns choices into necessities. And that's where the next phase begins.
This Committee of 300 told a man called Aurelio Pecchi to form this Club of Rome with the main object of bringing down the industries and the agricultural development of the United States. He immediately wrote a paper in which he said there are too many people on the earth, and that the United States, with its industrial development, its agricultural development, is responsible for this curse of overpopulation. So the Club of Rome was instituted and organized to start an attack on the world's population using the United States as the whipping boy. And they came up with a paper called the Zero Growth Post-Industrial Plan for Industry and Agriculture for the United States of America.
This is where his claims shift from politics to pressure. He connects the Committee of the Club of Rome. He connects the Club of Rome to zero growth. And then he connects zero growth to one outcome: tightening the system. Now, you don't have to accept the motive he assigns to it, but the mechanism is real. When systems tighten, the impact doesn't hit evenly. The wealthy buffer it, the poor adapt to it, and the middle absorbs it. Mortgages, wages, savings, stability. That's the layer that carries the strain. Now listen closely to what he claims next.
The middle class in the United States of America had to be destroyed because in the coming push to a world order, the middle class would be the stumbling block, because history had shown that the peasant class in ancient days, when they had revolted, were just easily crushed. There was no resistance. But now had grown a new super class of people in the United States called the middle class, who had long-term employment, who had job security, who were well paid, who could afford to buy the products that were made by the United States and didn't need to buy products from China or anywhere else. And the Club of Rome post-industrial zero growth paper said this has got to stop. We have to bring down the middle class of the United States. And the way that we will do this, the way that we will accomplish this task, is by crushing their industries.
Whether you call it policy, markets, or global pressure, the weight never lands evenly. It lands where society is most stable, the middle. Because the middle has something to lose: a job, a mortgage, a routine, a future. And when that layer weakens, dependence grows quietly. Not overnight, but structurally. While ordinary people feel instability as pain, those above it experience the same events as logistics. They hedge, they move assets, they buy buffers. And that's the real divide. Not what happens, but who it happens to. Here's how Coleman explains it.
The Club of Rome celebrated its celebratory anniversary, and Alexander King, its chairman, stated, the American people henceforth must get used to the idea that they will never ever again in their lifetime have full employment. What a scandalous thing that our government is fully cooperating with this organization built up by the Royal Institute for International Affairs to destroy the middle class of the United States.
By the end of this, you realize something disturbing. Coleman isn't asking you to fear a group, he's asking you to notice a pattern. That power doesn't always rule by force, it rules by structure. It decides what gets funded, what gets outsourced, what gets normalized, and what becomes permanent. And once society is locked into pressure, it doesn't need to be controlled loudly. It controls itself. And that's why faces can change, and the direction can stay identical. So maybe the question isn't who runs the world. Maybe it's simpler than that. What is the system designed to produce, no matter who you vote for?